Good morning. Oh, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to today's European Movement Ireland launch of our 2021 Ireland and the EU poll, a poll that we have commissioned Red C to carry out on our behalf since 2013. And I'm delighted to welcome you all this morning. Sincere apologies. As you may have gathered, we're having some technical and technological issues from Brussels this morning. So hopefully at some stage, Shona will be able to join us. I'm delighted to be joined this morning. We've a very distinguished speaker and analyst and expert on our long-running EM Ireland and the EU poll, Dr. Kathryn Simpson, Associate Professor in Political Economy at the Manchester Metropolitan University. And Kathryn is also Deputy Director of the Manchester Jean Monnet Centre for Excellence. Very good morning to you, Kathryn, and hope you're keeping well and safe in Manchester.
Thank you very much, Noelle. It's lovely to be here, and yeah, all very safe and well here in Manchester.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, look, ladies and gentlemen, we will try and crack on with all the findings. A lot to pick through and a lot to digest this morning. So the way we're going to do it is I'm going to ask Kathryn to maybe give us her top-level analysis of the poll findings, and then Kathryn, if that's okay, I'll kind of jump in with a couple of my thoughts, and then we will take it from there and tease some of the key findings out a little bit further. And hopefully at some stage, Shona will be able to rejoin us and magically appear on our screens all the way from Brussels. So ladies and gentlemen, if you do want to access any of the findings, make sure to look at our website, europeanmovement.ie. And those of you active on social media, please do feel free to share your thoughts and get involved in the conversation. Our hashtag is EMI Red C Poll 2021. And if you have any questions you'd like to ask Kathryn or myself, or hopefully Shona, drop us an email at events@europeanmovement.ie and my colleagues will send those on to you. So Kathryn, I might invite you to give your keynote overview and summaries of our bumper-packed 2021 EM Ireland EU poll. Thank you.
Thank you, Noelle, and thank you to everyone joining us today. As Noelle has correctly said, I've used the EMI Red C poll data in my research on Irish attitudes towards the EU since the first poll in 2013, and it's been crucial to my research, and I'm really delighted to have been invited by European Movement Ireland to take part in the launch and analysis today. There are 4 areas that I would like to reflect on based on today's results. The first one is EU membership, second, COVID-19, the third, obviously, Brexit, and then fourth and finally, security and defence. So beginning with EU membership then, respondents were asked, should Ireland remain a member of the European Union? And 84% of respondents agreed with this statement, the same as last year's poll in 2020. Now, to understand this 84%, I think it's very important to draw a parallel between the EMI Red C poll and standard Eurobarometer data, as both sets of data are consistent in their results when they examine these kind of Irish attitudes. So when you look at standard Eurobarometer data from 1972 right the way through to 2019, it shows that support for the EU in Ireland since 1987 in particular has been above the EU average. And it actually reached a record high of 83% in both 2017 and 2019. And that also then reflects what we are now seeing in the EMI Red C poll. And I think it's worth stating that while support for EU membership has seen, you could argue, a decline to 84%, those high-level supports of 90% and above in 2016, 18 and 19 were unsustainable. We had that Brexit bounce, but equally we should not expect support for the EU to be at that level when the average level of support for the EU is around 55 to 60%. All of this, I think, is kind of unsurprising in some respects. EU membership has been part of the modernisation of Ireland. It has had an impact on British-Irish relations that have been good for Ireland in those kind of intergovernmental organisations and institutions that the EU supports. And also membership of the European Union has been economically beneficial. We know that Irish people are viewed as pro-European with a pro-integrationist attitude, and they are often considered as good Europeans. But a small caveat on this is that the reality of Irish public opinion is a lot more nuanced. Support for the EU in Ireland is not a single entity. It is a complex set of opinions that are determined by a variety of factors. And we see this in the EMI poll on issues such as taxation, further integration in terms of political and economic integration, but also then in issues as well, policy issues, specific policy issues with regards to health. And I think it's very telling that only 53% of respondents agree that the EU is moving in the right direction. So there is a lot more work to be done in order to address that knowledge deficit that we potentially see in Ireland. On the second issue then, on health, the poll asked respondents whether they have confidence in the EU's COVID-19 vaccine strategy. And 45% agree, 48% disagree. Now, for the EU, we can talk at this at length. The vaccine rollout has experienced serious problems. We have seen bad luck in procurement choices. We have seen contract issues, slower regulatory approval, disruption of the production of vaccines, but also a very slow start to national rollout programs. And I think that the success of the UK's rollout has been frustrating. Because on the one hand, for Eurosceptics, it's evidence of the necessity of Brexit. But for the EU, the UK's successful vaccine rollout has been at the EU's expense due to that belief around AstraZeneca and the tens of millions of vaccine doses that should have really gone to the EU from the UK. I think it's really worth pointing out here that it is not because of Brexit that the UK was able to procure its own vaccine supplies. The EU's joint procurement scheme is optional, meaning that the UK could have signed agreements with pharmaceutical companies while still being a member state. Now, this would have been quite politically sensitive. We've seen this with Germany and some of the aspects around that, but the EU cannot stop that course of action. There are undoubtedly big questions about whether or not the EU is properly set up to deal with a once-in-a-century mass vaccination campaign. But I think it is exceptionally important to remember that the EU is not a state. It does not have full executive powers in the area of health policy, and powers in relation to health policy are still at member state level. And if you want health policy to be an EU competence, you would need treaty change. Which brings me then to, I think, the additional question that was asked in the poll about, in order to deal with crises such as COVID-19, Ireland and EU member states should give the EU more control over healthcare policy, even if this sees Ireland as losing control at the national level. And 49% of respondents disagree with this in Ireland. So again, I think that, the vaccine rollout has inflicted enormous reputational damage for the European Union, and there will be very a long and painful inquest into how things might have been done differently. The third topic then I want to briefly talk about will be the topic of Brexit. So respondents were asked whether there will be a united Ireland in the EU in the next 10 years, and 43% of respondents disagree. When you drill down into this question a little bit more, the highest the group agreeing the most with this is highest among the 18 to 24 group. 51% of 18 to 24-year-olds agree that there would be a united Ireland in the EU in the next 10 years. And what is interesting about this group is that this is an age group that has grown up in Northern Ireland under the 1998 Good Friday Agreement. And I think that is very telling of what we've seen in the last couple of weeks in Northern Ireland, but also perhaps around the differences with regards to peace and prosperity in Northern Ireland across a variety of age groups. Generally speaking, opinion polling data on United Ireland varies considerably. Two polls that were conducted this year by the Sunday Times in January and Savanta Comrades in February have placed a United Ireland around the 42-43% mark, that's plus 10% more than what we're seeing in the EMI poll. And actually, I think this is worth noting that those polls were conducted in Northern Ireland. So what we are seeing is a wide difference and in attitudes towards United Ireland on the island of Ireland. Finally, then, on the issue of security and defence, respondents were asked, should Ireland be part of increased EU defence and security cooperation? And 54% of respondents agree with this, and this was the highest among older age groups. Now, this is a 5% increase on last year's poll. From 49%. It's not a huge increase. Let's not get too excited, but I think it's worth noting for the following reasons. Every development in EU foreign and security policy has been contested in Ireland. It was the sole ground of success in a constitutional challenge to Ireland's ratification of the Single European Market in 1986, or European Single Act, in 1986. And in all subsequent Irish referendums on major EU treaty change, the allegation that the EU was on the path of creating a European army has been a real potent weapon for no campaigners in Ireland, and very, very difficult to address for yes campaigners. And this has also led then to specific treaty protocols and formal EU Council decisions defining the parameters of European defence cooperation for Ireland. And I think this is a very interesting point to finish on in kind of my round robin analysis, because it shows the differences we are seeing on very specific policy issues. So while we are seeing that more integration could happen in security and defence, which used to always be a very hot topic, we are not seeing it in other key policy areas. So I'll leave things there and I'll welcome any questions from the panel.
That, Kathryn. Hello everyone, Shona Murray here. Apologies for the serious technical issues we had at the start. They seem to be resolved, but we can't say that for sure. I'll just go on straight to you, Noelle, just to give us, your own forensic analysis, not in as much as detail, because we'll go through the detail, but starting off with that 84% support for Ireland's membership of the EU, which has reduced, obviously, as we know. And I suppose what you think is the reason for that reduction, taking into account the fact that Kathryn says that the high number of around 90% was probably unsustainable in the first place. Thanks.
Thanks a million, Shona. Yeah, no, I think really interesting to see it very much maintained at 84%, as Kathryn already highlighted in her opening remarks, from the high with the Brexit bounce of 93%. But that's very much in line, actually, broadly with the figures in those who voted for Ireland to join the EC as we approach the 50-year accession treaty. So very interesting to see that over the course of our long membership of the European Union, support for Ireland remaining an active and a committed and engaged member of the EU has not waned since we first joined. So, but I think, I suppose, one factor that I'd mention as well that is interesting is the 53% of respondents believing the EU is moving in the right direction, suggesting definitely that there is work to do and that we must certainly not take that for granted and continue to maintain that strong support for membership in the years ahead, which ties in very nicely with the importance of the upcoming conference of the future of Europe. And that's something that we in European Movement Ireland will be working very actively on. And it's really important that people across the country and on the island of Ireland have their say, and that we then feed that back into what the views and perspectives are across the EU, because this is a very much a pan-European element. And it's interesting to see the attention and the focus that is getting. And I think one finding that stood out, Shona, for us was that we found very encouraging the fact that almost 3/4 of people believed that EU funding to member states should be linked to rule of law principles. And these are fundamental to the values of the founding of the EU. We also saw in the poll that respondents expressed strong opinions on climate change, on digital regulation, and these are another two issues at the forefront of the EU agenda. And again, as Kathryn referenced, nearly 4 months after the finalisation of the very difficult and torturous negotiations in terms of Brexit and in terms of the concluding of the EU-UK trade agreement, less than 1/3 of respondents at 32% 60% believe that there will be a united Ireland in the EU in the next 10 years. Broadly the same figure as 2020, perhaps somewhat surprising given the increased scrutiny in this area since last year, since when we carried out the poll this time last year, and since the greater bandwidth and coverage this topic has received. So again, very much a lot to unpick and a lot to go through in the poll.
Yeah, especially that piece about rule of law, because you wonder how much people in Ireland are interpreting or engaging in what's happening in countries like Hungary and Poland. We're not as closely conscious with countries like that, in particular because we've had our own concerns around Brexit, and there's huge intensity around COVID, before that economic crisis and so on. So we will move on to that. But let's get on to the issue that we've been discussing for a year in relation to the EU, specifically the COVID-19 vaccine strategy. Only 45% of people think that the EU strategy is the right one. Now, I think it's important to bear in mind that this poll was taken, around the third week of March. And I know that's only a few weeks ago, but you can say that the EU's vaccine strategy has picked up a pace in terms of the rollout in member states, and also some of the more optimistic news that have come from Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer. Supply things seem to be sort of on the mend. But Kathryn, is this a problem for the EU? The fact that citizens believe that it's really messed up here, and one of the most important tests of the century.
I think it is. It's going to be a really key challenge for the European Union. I mean, they launched their vaccine strategy in June, but they've also been in uncharted territory, like every member state as well. This is something that is really, really new. And I think that it's very important to remember that health policy is a nation state competency. It's not at the EU level. So member states have been very worried about handing over those kind of national health powers. And there's also been an issue as well around getting member state buy-in. It's also been hampered a little bit by the EU negotiating effort on contracts and different things. But that is a really big ask when you're also in a challenging circumstance for a member state to do. And cost has also come up as a key issue. So generally speaking, how it's been done is that it's been allocated on a pro rata allocation, with countries getting doses according to their population size, which would have been advantageous for a small member state like Ireland. But I think it's what's been highlighted, certainly in mass media, is the differences in the vaccine rollout strategy. And that is what is kind of gauging kind of traction. The EU has missed its first target to vaccinate 80% of the over 80s by the start of April. On the 28th of March, that rate was 59.8%. So it's quite a way off. The next target is to vaccinate 70% of the population by the end of July. And as you've said, with kind of more vaccines becoming available, with generally the rollout starting to speed up, I think there is a possibility that the EU might meet that second target. And I think it is going to be something that I think will maybe feed into kind of the Convention on the Future of Europe about, is this a competency that does need to be needs treaty change and essentially then be passed up to the EU level?
But Noelle, there's a lot of layers to the EU's vaccine strategy. One of the first contracts they signed was with AstraZeneca, and AstraZeneca has failed to deliver. But instead of AstraZeneca getting a lot of the blame and the criticism, it comes down to the EU, which is not a country, which has been tried to work 27 governments, some of which didn't want to spend money on Pfizer and so on. Much more difficult. But how much of this is communication? Because if you see the fact that people disagree that the EU has done a good job, and when you look at the context of actually getting 27 countries who really withhold confidence when it comes to healthcare, and knowing that actually the vaccine manufacturers have a lot to answer to here. I mean, is the EU doing a really bad job in the communication, or should it, actually be criticised for doing not a great job at this test?
Look, I think it's fair to say, Shona, that nobody would claim that the EU had a somewhat turbulent start to it in its terms of its response to the vaccine strategy. but I know we overuse that word unprecedented, but it truly was unprecedented. There wasn't a manual or a template or a how-to ready to deal with this, and the complexities of the multifaceted nature of the differing national approaches, and the EU not having the overarching competency in the treaty frameworks for health policy certainly led to some speed bumps. But to your point on communications, listeners and viewers will be somewhat sick of hearing me say this, but we do have a tendency to nationalize success and Europeanize failure. So we have to look at how national governments are rolling that out. But interesting on the timing, Shona, I think a key thing for this, when we did this fieldwork, as everything in relation to polls, they are but a snapshot of time. It is useful to track over the years. When the fieldwork took place, as you said, it was late March. The positive news on Pfizer hadn't come through. And arguably, as the vaccination rollout would ramp up, I think the view and the sentiment on that might be somewhat different were we to carry out the poll again late summer. But just one thing on vaccine strategy, I was reminded that it takes on average about 10 years to develop a vaccine. What scientists have done in turning around a vaccine to the coronavirus in 10 months is phenomenal. And the EU has, in fairness, provided a huge level of funding, research development support, along with others in that regard. And just to Kathryn's point, and I'm very mindful of that she's joining us from Manchester, but I mean, something that I think we in Ireland should always also bear in mind from an Irish perspective in terms of our purchasing power. The entire population of Ireland is less than the populations of the cities of Birmingham and Manchester combined. So certainly from an Irish perspective, in terms of vaccine market access, in terms of price conditions, due to our membership of the EU, with its larger heft, with its greater purchasing power, procurement ability, we certainly in Ireland have benefited from that in terms of that access, were we forced to have gone to market on our own.
Yeah. Kathryn, you are in Manchester, obviously. Do you think that the EU would do a better job if it had greater competence for health? Because we're actually, the next thing in our poll, of course, is that only 35% of people now want to give the EU more control in the area of health. But in order for them to do a better job, maybe they need that. But I suppose they haven't really proven to citizens that they should deliver that. And I suppose the fact that you're in the UK, you know how difficult it is to have a serious, sort of fair, clear debate about the EU. We know it ourselves in particular, you know, about referendums too. They never tend to be about the actual issues. And also, when there's a lack of knowledge about the facts, anybody can lie to persuade people in a particular direction. Do you think it's likely people would give in to having the EU having more competence on this area?
I mean, my first initial reaction would be no, because again, I think that it has been such a difficult thing to manage. It has, as Noelle said, has been unprecedented, and the EU hasn't really painted itself in a very positive light. But as Noelle correctly pointed out, for small member states like Ireland, this is something that is really, really crucial, because if Ireland and many other smaller EU member states, if they had to go on the open market and do them themselves, it would be very, very difficult to do so. So in that respect, the EU is actually, you know, being very, very successful, and in a very, very short space of time, did collectively get agreement among 27 EU member states quicker than they would have on a lot of other issues. So there has been successes, but I think it's the kind of comms and communication around that. You know, we don't have a central EU press corps, for example, that doesn't roll that out like a national press can. And that has a real impact.
Understood, Kathryn? Can I ask you, because, you know, when you hear a lot or even read about, particularly in the British press, about the EU's rollout, it's basically, you know, a failure of the whole EU project. Might as well throw in the towel sort of context, you know. And also, but from an Irish point of view, do you think that there's a realisation that Ireland doesn't and wouldn't have the negotiating heft to go out on the open market and get, you know, whatever, 4 million vaccines, 8 million vaccines? Germany, France, the UK would have them first. But do you think that that's realised? I
think it's, in the terms of the kind of, if you're taking the first point first about the EU perspective in British politics, I mean, the British press has used the EU as the scapegoat for many years. Euroscepticism did not, you know, appear in 2016 or even 2014 in the UK. It has been long-standing, and again, even post-Brexit, it is still being used as the scapegoat for things that haven't worked out quite well. As I said at the very beginning in my point, that the EU's joint procurement scheme is optional. So when people say, oh, well, this in the UK, Brexit has facilitated this fantastic, speedy vaccine rollout in the UK, and blaming the EU for that and the fact that Brexit has facilitated, that is absolutely not the case whatsoever. On the question then of Ireland and whether people in Ireland realise that this is, that there is the advantage of being part of the larger European Union in order to procure vaccines, I think this is where that knowledge deficit comes in to Irish public opinion. Yes, it's pro-integrationist. Yes, it's pro-European and supports, strong support for the European Union. But on very key policy areas, there is a real lack of knowledge, and that is where the work has to be done. We see this on health policy. We have seen it in security and defence previously. And again, we know as well that there's very little appetite when you look at the poll for further European integration in areas of kind of political and economic integration. So this is going to be something difficult to tease out.
Noelle, how do you rate Irish politicians' knowledge of the vaccine strategy in the EU? Because I've heard Irish politicians saying we should be like Austria and do what Sebastian Kurz has done. Sebastian Kurz actually didn't buy enough Pfizer vaccines, and that's why his rollout's a mess. But I've literally heard Irish politicians say, but Austria's going to do a deal with Israel because he was forced to, because he didn't buy enough Pfizer. They're saying we should be like Hungary and buy Sputnik V. But Sputnik V hasn't been authorised. How many people want to take a vaccine that hasn't been authorised by the EMA? You do hear a lot of Irish politicians. In my opinion, I'm thinking that's not facts. I mean, they could do a bit of research themselves, and obviously speak in a factual sense, but also know what's happening with the EU vaccine strategy. When you listen to that, are you kind of worried that they're sort of blaming the EU rather than taking it upon themselves to learn a little bit more?
Well, the first thing I suppose I would say on that is that as an organisation dedicated to cutting through the noise and the fog and reinforcing factual debate based on knowledge, based on facts, based on truth and accountability, we are all in favour of all our political representatives, not only here in Ireland, but more broadly, working on that very same premise and basis. I think you raise a really interesting point, Shona, because what we're seeing in terms of the media focus, like if there's any issue that has captured, understandably, the heart, soul, and minds of the population, politicians, and everywhere, is this the COVID pandemic and the vaccine strategy, and the comparison poll at a national level on how different EU member states are doing. I know that myself and the head of the European Commission representation here in Ireland, the former head, Jerry Kiley, we were invited to present an overview of the EU COVID vaccine strategy late last year. And I have to say, and I'm genuinely not just saying this, but that level of knowledge and engagement by the Oireachtas EU Affairs Committee on this whole issue was really, really welcome and important to see that. And they are to be commended, actually, for the work and the analysis that they have gone in to putting into this. It is such an important and emotive issue, and how we go about engaging and upskilling and increasing our knowledge on this. It's not easy, because I think there is so much misinformation and disinformation and competing narratives put out around this, Shona. I think that's where there is a real challenge to get to the truth of and the nub of the matter. And that's why the role of the EMA, and in fairness, we've seen a significant ramp up in communications. Their executive director, an Irish lady, Emer Cook, leading on that. And that's really important, that we have to take our information and our guidelines from trusted sources.
Yeah, Kathryn, do you think that, I mean, this isn't over, and most analysts would say that the EU and Ireland, of course, will meet the target by July, at least, to have 70% of adults vaccinated. Do you see that happening?
Yeah, I do. I think with the changes now, I think we're starting to see an upturn in general from the EU perspective on this, and again in terms of vaccine procurement, and starting to see vaccines being filtered down into EU member states and actually being administered. And we know as well in the UK that there has been a slowing down of the vaccine rollout over the month of April. But I agree wholeheartedly with Noelle here that this is something, COVID-19 was something that was brand new and to all of us, member states, international organizations, individuals. And I think then, we've constantly had to upskill our knowledge in real time. And, when we live in an era of fake news and disinformation and misinformation, it is very, very important, I think, for governments and for international organizations to have a very clear communication strategy about where things are going, in order to kind of combat some of that knowledge deficit and really make sure that people are correctly informed.
Okay, just a question from Casey O'Riordan from News Talk. She's saying that the 18 to 24-year-olds and the over 65s are the two age cohorts with the most confidence in the vaccine rollout. Is there anything that you can read into that? Is there a reason why they're the two cohorts on either end of the scale that support it the most or have most confidence in it?
It's a very interesting one. I mean, again, I would say kind of the youth optimism, number one, probably perhaps, and again, this is just posturing at the 18 to 24, but then the over 65s, again, I think perhaps because they've probably been part potentially now of a vaccine, they've either received a first dose or they're about to imminently receive a first dose. So they're actually seeing the effects and experiencing the rollout in real time. So perhaps that's what I would attribute that to.
Just Noelle, briefly, do you think it's because I suppose younger people have gained so much from the EU in terms of Erasmus, interrailing, that it opens young people's horizons very much so if they engage in it?
Absolutely, absolutely, Shona. And it's really interesting. Actually, that point has come across very strongly, in particular in this year's poll, the concurrence in perspectives and viewpoint amongst our youngest demographic, the 18 to 24 cohort, and the over 65s. In a lot of the questions and the findings, there has been remarkable similarity in percentage numbers between those two groups. And it is arguably the perhaps maybe the disenfranchised middle, that 35 to 44-year-old cohort that have had the highest levels of disagreeing. So it's certainly one to tease out further. And I think, absolutely. I think younger people are very much aware and focused of the opportunities and the benefits that they have been able to enjoy and that accrue to them due to our membership.
And I suppose the middle ground are the ones who experienced the bank bailout in those disastrous years where they felt bullied by centre of Europe. And the over 65s remember what it was like not to be in the EU and not have the common travel area and single market and the opportunities and so on. Let's move on to the United Ireland in the EU in the next 10 years. 32% of people agree there will be United Ireland in the EU in the next 10 years. I just want to ask you, first of all, Noelle, is that, in the EU, was there a possibility that there would be, a question that Ireland could be United Ireland outside the EU, or is it just within the EU? Just tell me a little bit about that, the specifics about whether it's in the EU or not.
Yeah, sure. Look, obviously, as our organisation, Shona, has as its title European Movement Ireland, and we obviously wanted to give a European focus to this really important and timely question on the whole issue of united Ireland, the island of Ireland. And obviously, if we're talking about in terms of the Northern Ireland Protocol and how that refers to the island of Ireland. And let's not lose sight of the fact as well, there's about 700,000 Irish passport holders in the north. There are many more people in Northern Ireland who identify as Irish and therefore are entitled to EU citizenship, are European. So for us, we wanted to get a sense of what did people think on this particular topic and what was their viewpoint and perspective. And very interesting, Shona, for me, and I know, Kathryn, you touched upon it, was the similarity in terms of the findings and the very, very large cohort of 25% of people replying that they didn't know. 26% didn't know last year. So the similarities on the don't knows, this was one of the largest don't knows of any of the questions we had. So I think and we've seen with Taoiseach Micheál Martin and the Department of Taoiseach, the Shared Island Initiative, for us as part of our work that the Department of Foreign Affairs and Minister Thomas Byrne will be leading on the Conference on the Future of Europe, getting the viewpoints of all people on the island of Ireland is going to be hugely important. And but watch this space. I mean, it's interesting, Kathryn. I think you referenced the Northern Ireland poll findings on BBC Spotlight last night. So just interesting to see two polls coming out in 2 days. But there you go.
Yeah, Kathryn, just on that, what is interesting, and people don't really acknowledge it as much, particularly here in Brussels, when they think about Brexit, it's just about the protocol and it's about trade. But nobody, even conversations I've had with my own colleagues, realise that people born in Northern Ireland, even though that's part of the UK, are entitled to be EU citizens if they wish, because, of course, the Good Friday Agreement. Do you think that can lead to, I suppose, greater support for United Ireland because of EU membership? A little bit the way like Scottish people really want to be part of the EU, and in that context of independence.
It's very interesting because a lot of the polls that we have seen in Northern Ireland and England or the UK have positioned the question of independence, so United Ireland and Scottish independence, exactly in that context about aligning it to EU membership. And that is something that the Scottish independence and the SNP have really kind of hooked onto for a long time. I mean, I remember having conversations with somebody in Holyrood during my PhD in 2013 exactly on that issue. And I think it is something that perhaps, we have seen also a very different strategy as well within political parties. So the vast majority of political parties in the Republic of Ireland and Ireland are pro-European to everyone's a perspective. And we saw a shift even within Sinn Féin during, after, as a consequence of the 2016 EU referendum on that, aligning itself to kind of being perhaps not, Euro-critical and being more pro-Europe, kind of more pro-European. I think that's an interesting shift. I would fully agree with Noelle here that the 25% of don't knows is one to watch. You always watch your don't knows in this instance, and I think that is very, very high. And it'd be interesting to see where they shift towards. Yeah. I also sorry, go on, Shona.
Oh no, just that's my point. I was going to ask you. Do you think, let's say, if you were trying to push for United Ireland, Sinn Féin, or any of your political parties, that instead of sort of doing it as an orange-green way, the way it's traditionally done, which is kind of exclusivity, that you do it through an EU way and say, that membership of the EU means that we will all have, equal rights and better opportunities. If you were trying to push for that through the EU, might be a good idea.
I mean, it's one way that it can be done. And as I said, that's one way that the SNP and Scottish independence has been framed. I mean, that would be up to, political parties and go forward with that. But, it is one way it can be done. I don't know, is it perhaps the correct way for Northern Ireland? And it's always because this is a United Ireland issue. It's not an orange, green or a north, south or east, west issue. So it's a difficult one, I think, to unpick. And I also think that what's interesting about the results of the poll here is the varying degrees of support among the age groups. I mean, what really stood out to me, which I was quite taken back by, was 51% of 18 to 24-year-olds agree that there will be a United Ireland within the EU in the next 10 years. And that is an age group that has grown up under the 1998 Good Friday Agreement. I mean, that is remarkable to think that so maybe it is something about EU membership and opportunities afforded by the EU that is perhaps being more aligned to a younger group than potentially an older group. And maybe we are seeing a breakdown of those orange and green barriers. But I think you could be reading a bit too much into that from, say, this poll. I know there's a brand new Lucid Talk poll that has been published by Queen's University Belfast today that looks specifically at the attitudes around the protocol and how this then links to the issue of United Ireland, with some very interesting findings as well.
Noelle, do you think the EU member states, the Commission and so on, have the competency and the will, I suppose, to support reunification in the way that it is needed? Obviously we all hear from leaders saying that's, it's the dream, reunited Ireland, the EU will support. But I mean the competency to actually help what would be an upheaval for many people in terms of, money and so on, but support, and whether or not member states would get behind it.
Well, I think the EU will be very mindful of, I suppose, not interfering, if I could put it that way, in terms of that constitutional question. I think the EU, the support that from the funding, the peace programme that the former regional commissioner Michel Barnier and his colleagues were key at the time to facilitating and embedding the under, behind the scenes, a lot of cross-border and cross-community engagement, and that's hugely important. And I was always reminded, Shona, in any of the dealings or engagements I had in Brussels with the Parliament, with the Commission or the Council and officials and MEPs, they always referenced how the Good Friday Agreement and peace on the island of Ireland was one of the key signature standout achievements for the EU, because that on 60 miles up the road from my office here, the Troubles really was one of the sole remaining conflict areas throughout the European Union. So the EU is at its heart a peace project. So anything to maintaining that peace is crucial. In terms of I think the EU will obviously reunification, the whole referendum, the possibility of a border poll. These are all, I think, some ways ahead. I'm not going to lie. I think the process has been expedited as a result of Brexit, or without a doubt, in my opinion, it has certainly sped that up. But I don't think we're looking at something as immediate and imminent on that. And I think we have to be careful. It has to be consensual, it has to be constructive, and we have to be mindful of bringing people along, because it has to respect all viewpoints and all perspectives. We can't afford to return to the bad old days, and what we're seeing only the last couple of weeks on our TV screens sharply remind us of the potential of things escalating as well.
And Kathryn, do you think that Brexit, I mean, it's not particularly on this, but do you think Brexit has had much of a damaging effect to Irish support for EU membership? Like that maybe some people feel that Ireland should follow the UK out of the EU, or it's remained consistent and Irish people have continued and not really questioned membership?
I mean, straight after the 2016 EU referendum, when the UK left, there was the whole kind of debate and talk about an Irish exit of the European Union. I was did some very in-depth research on this, using previous polling data by EMI Red C on this, and there was absolutely no appetite whatsoever for an Irish exit. There just wasn't. And following the UK out of the European Union, that was you were looking at polling data of kind of 80% plus, sometimes 90%, about people not Brexit should not lead to an Irish exit. And I think that debate is well and truly put to bed, quite frankly.
Yeah,
I do. I don't think Ireland will follow the UK out of the European Union. I think support for the European is robustly strong and consistently strong. Because when you look at the polling data from, the series of polls from EMI, and as Noelle said, this is a snapshot. So, you've got to take them in some respects with a pinch of salt, because it is a snapshot in time. But when you look then at large N, long survey data like Standard Eurobarometer, they are very reflective of what we see in the EMI polls. So I don't think that Brexit will lead to an Irish exit of the European Union. However, I do believe that there is a lot of work to be done on key policy areas. And that is where the real challenge is now, I think, for getting knowledge across to people in Ireland about the European Union. Okay. So things on health, taxation, defence, etc.
Yeah, we're going to move on to that now. Actually, and if anybody wants to put a question or a remark, send an email, events@europeanmovement.ie. And this is an area that we have seen hesitancy in terms of support from the EU. And this is obviously to do with taxation, big issue around the Lisbon Treaty. There's the question being, there should be more political and economic integration in the EU, even if this means member states lose control over economic policy, e.g. tax. Obviously, that was one of the reasons why people voted against the Lisbon Treaty. In this case, 52% disagree, and that's not surprising. Kathryn, is it?
No, not surprising at all. Again, this has been one of those kind of red flag issues when we look at the series of referendums we've had in Ireland. So, I mean, you can date this back to, our first no referendum to 2001 to Nice. And in particular, this was a very key issue, as you said, in the Lisbon Treaty in 2008 and 2007 and 8. But what I think is very, taxation is, and our corporate tax policy is something that, is very very linked to the Irish economy, to the structure of the economy. It's something that, is very key to how the country runs. And I think that given I suppose the difficulties around COVID-19 and how that policy and competency area has been rolled out, I don't think the appetite will be there to kind of transfer and push that up to the EU level.
Okay.
It's unsurprising, the 52%. I would have maybe anticipated to be a little bit higher, actually.
Yes, me too, actually. And Noelle, but there is a push in Brussels, obviously, for fair taxation policy, a harmonisation on the on tax in certain areas, the CCCTB, for example. That's been sort of ongoing for 12, maybe more years. And then there's, of course, the digital tax. So there is pressure coming on Ireland. Do you think that's fair enough, that type of pressure? Do you think the government should resist it or engage a little bit better? Because we know Ireland stands out for its complete resistance in this area.
Well, I think somewhat wrongly, I think Ireland tends to be the boogeyman in terms of all things to do with tax, and it's easy a lot of times to point the finger at Ireland when a lot of actually the EU other member states have lower corporate tax rates than ourselves, and different arrangements and different deals are done. However, I think there is broad recognition that I suppose tax, it's not just an Irish issue, it's not even an EU issue. The OECD, Shona, as you mentioned, is obviously to the fore of this. And also we've seen President Biden recently come out and talk about this. So in terms of ensuring a fairer tax rate, it is something that needs to be tackled at a global level. And to Kathryn's point, what was interesting in the 2021 question on tax was that last year in 2020, we asked respondents whether they viewed as to whether they felt that Ireland should give up the veto at the EU table and allow the 27 member states to make a decision on tax by a majority vote. And again, very similar to this year with that 52% disagreeing. Last year, 51% disagreed. So what we're seeing, to Kathryn's point, is the red lines are you know, there are some core key constituents, and it's something that is always of interest to our EU ambassador colleagues. They always ask us to explain why are Irish people so firmly of the perspective that we need to have that sovereignty on our tax issue, and it's something that people feel very strongly about.
But I mean, is Ireland, I mean, I know you say Ireland's unfairly painted as the boogeyman, but I mean, the fact that Ireland resisted, for example, country by country reporting of how much tax is paid by huge multinationals, I mean, that is really not engaging constructively if you think about it. It's just basic transparency. I mean, do you think that maybe Ireland could maybe give a little bit more in this area and then not be painted as a tax haven as consistently as it is? Noelle?
Yeah, I hope that, I think the efforts that the government and others are doing on this issue is probably helping in that regard, and I think it's welcome. And in terms of that constructive engagement, that's going to be really, really important. And from our perspective, that transparency and accountability and fairness is something that I think is really important. But getting that balance right, nobody wants to see an unfair distribution, but nor should we be penalised as a country for having the ability and the competency and the long track record of attracting FDI, which is so crucial in terms of employment. But I think certainly the dial is shifting on that, and I think Ireland will certainly have to constructively ramp up its engagement. And maybe there's a conversation there that we need to have as a country and as a society and as a people, because sometimes it can seem very abstract, and I think maybe it needs to be teased out and discussed very much to at a very concrete and factual and practical level.
Okay, and just on Noelle, just made the point there that, you know, taxation relates to sovereignty. I mean, that S word that we heard so much in the Brexit. Is this an area that maybe you could see Irish people turn their backs on the EU?
I mean, this whole issue around tax and sovereignty and how it's linked so crucially to the economy dates back to the early 90s and the kind of the European Commission's, you know, wanting, you know, the Irish government to dampen the Celtic tiger and the refusal to do so. And I think as a consequence, then this is the issue and topic of taxation has adopted kind of a historical legacy approach, hasn't it, in Ireland, and people have kind of homed in on it. So you look back on, you know, the latest two EU the EU referendums in 2001, Nice and Lisbon in 2008, about the loss of an EU commissioner and how much that kind of garnered support behind it. And I think that taxation is a kind of a similar issue. But I would agree with Noelle here that, you know, we need to address this knowledge deficit, because I don't believe it's because the vast majority of Irish public opinion is very well informed around taxation and FDI and the structure of our economy. I think it's about how it's a positioning issue and how it's aligned to Irish membership of the European Union and wanting to kind of hold back some of that sovereignty. That is why I thought, again, it was very interesting, the findings on security and defence, and we're starting to see a shift. But we're not seeing the same shift when it comes to the economy, and we're not seeing people wanting further economic European integration either. And I think that is one to watch.
And then just on the security issue, people are very supportive, of course, of Ireland's UN Security Council seat. 68% of people are very supportive of that. And as you mentioned there, Kathryn, also support in relation to increased defence. That surprised me, actually. I thought that people held the non-formal alignment or neutrality as much closer. You know, 54% of people actually agree Ireland should be increased defence. Now, we don't know if that is actually joining NATO per se, but it's certainly something that the EU member states, now that the UK have left, would like to see Ireland do.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this was, again, you know, let's not get too excited. It's a 5% increase, but equally, it's still a percentage increase on an area that has really been, you know, very, very difficult for Ireland to navigate, because as you say, that, you know, everything has been very much linked to the issue of neutrality around membership of the European Union and the protection of Irish neutrality. And again, you know, we have seen in various Irish referendums about, you know, the difficulty of, you know, no campaigns aligning to the creation of a European army, for example, and having to really rebuff that has been very, very difficult. So I do think that it's a very interesting and noteworthy increase. And again, I thought it was also interesting to note that it was highest among the older age groups, so the over 55s. The over 55s see this as a, you know, agree with this statement, you know, 60+%. So maybe we are seeing a shift. Maybe there's a bounce as well from kind of the UN Security Council seat. I think that might be one way of seeing this and interpreting it. It will be interesting to see, you know, when we do the poll again next year, what the finding is on this, because I think it's very interesting that there is a shift in attitudes in an area which was so crucial to, you know, mass public opinion, kind of a bit like taxation. Maybe are we starting to see a shift in some respects on these key issues? And
I wanted to move on to the rule of law really briefly, but Noelle, just on the or the sort of EU army issue that emerges every time we talk about PESCO or defence and so on, what do you say when people say to you, well, now that the British are gone, we are going to have to join this EU army, we're going to be forced to do it? And so, like, what's your position on that? What do you say to people?
There's no such thing. You know, and I suppose on that regard, very interesting, notwithstanding, Shona, the topic that, as Kathryn mentioned, in terms of the findings, what we have seen when we've polled this question over the last number of years, support for Ireland taking a more active engagement on the EU defence security cooperation has never fallen below 49% of last year. So it's been in the 50s in all of the other years. So that's really, really interesting. And when we were going around the country discussing the future of Europe, with as part of the Department of Foreign Affairs Future of Europe consultation process. So we were doing town hall debates and dialogues, you know, from everywhere from Cavan to Cork and everywhere in between. I was really, really struck at how people's perspectives on PESCO, on cybersecurity, cyber terrorism, the global geopolitical challenges and the more insecure disinformation, fake news, all of these things, I think, people were more mindful and aware of them, and I was really, really surprised at how, I suppose, that the findings were over 50%. That there's a majority, I guess, is in favour of it. But I think equally, I think we are very much mindful of our distinguished and very proud track record of unbroken peacekeeping service, and that's something that I think will remain crucial to us here in Ireland. But equally, I think people are aware of the increasing complexity geopolitically of the world that we are inhabiting.
And Kathryn, one thing that does stand out is on these issues around Facebook and social media platforms, the rule of law issues. People are actually wanting the EU to intervene more and stand by when it comes to the de-democratization in countries like Hungary and Poland. The fact that LGBT people are being consistently targeted. 77% of people agree that the EU should withhold payments to member states unless they comply with rule of law. But it's also interesting, 83% of them are people 18 to 24 and over 65. They see the EU as maybe preserving certain liberal principles. But the EU has failed here. I mean, this is, to me, the biggest failure of the EU.
I mean, it's an interesting finding. I wasn't surprised by how high it was. I would disagree with you in terms of how the EU has failed in this area. Yes, I think it could do more, but I also think that, it's probably evident among people that this is not enough to be tackled at the national level. This is where we need further cooperation. This is something that goes beyond borders, a bit like COVID. It needs to be done at that kind of intergovernmental and supranational level.
But that's my point. It's not, though. I mean, that's the thing. You have many council meetings and everyone shies away from criticising Viktor Orban because he's in the EPP. We have our own government in Ireland who's been in the EPP with him since the start, but Viktor Orban has been engaging in these sort of attacks on the LGBT community for over a decade, and nothing's been done from an intergovernmental point of view or a commission point of view. I mean, we had a huge row over basic rule of law, text just a few months ago.
I think, yeah. So on the issue of rule of law and member states and how that has been tackled, and as you say, the Viktor Orban government, I think you're absolutely right. And I think what I would probably disagree on is in the perspective of social media and that kind of thing. I think that, that's where the EU has seen some successes. And, maybe it is taking a long time, probably far, far too long. But again, I think we have been so preoccupied, certainly in Ireland and certainly in the UK, by issues around Brexit, around COVID-19, that it's not that this is not important and it's not that it's not a key issue, but I don't believe that it's at the forefront of everybody's minds. And again, not to stand up for the EU too much in this area, but actually perhaps their minds have been preoccupied with, certainly Brexit has paralyzed, the EU institutions over the last kind of 4 or 5 years. And now that it is potentially finally done, depending on how you want to interpret the EU-UK trade agreement, key issues like this now should be addressed further at the EU level.
But a lot of people would say that's too late, Noelle. I mean, we've had these issues with Orban, 12, 14 years ago. Nothing was done. Now we see Poland. This level of illiberalism is actually creeping in Slovenia and so on. And all of these member states can, work together. And so, for example, the Article 7 process doesn't work. And there's always going to be a crisis. I mean, a few years ago was obviously the debt crisis, the banking crisis. Now it's Brexit, then it's COVID. So is it okay to say, well, actually, sorry, I allowed all these democracies slip because we had a crisis to deal with?
No. I mean, obviously, for those of us who espouse a European Union founded on the values of which it was actually founded, in terms of respect, human rights, equality, it's not welcome at all to see what is happening in some of these countries. And I think I was really, really pleased at a personal level to see such level of support here in Ireland for the EU more robustly, with more muscle in this, and in tying the distribution of funding to that respect for rule of law, for democracy. I think on the on Orban and the EPP side of things, the Fidesz has I think left. I think a lot of members in EPP are not too displeased with that. I think in terms of some of the findings we're seeing, perhaps I saw a town in Poland now that due to it not getting funding from the EU, due to creating the
LGBT-free zones,
that now the people in the town want to reverse that. So slowly but slowly, the impact will be felt, and it's really important that, notwithstanding the internal challenges, as you correctly outlined, Shona, in terms of Article 7 and everything, it's very complex. It's very hard to get agreement amongst 27 at all times and at all levels, and trying to kind of keep people on board is always a challenge, and we have to respect as well. But that the EU should not be shy about robustly defending the very principles of which it was founded upon, which is great to see people in Ireland are supportive of that.
Okay, and I think we just do a quick 1 minute rapid to you, Kathryn. So a lot of people say that the EU is sort of is going to fail after Brexit. That was the assumption, particularly in the sort of Brexit mainland. Do you see that happening? Do you think that the EU the answer for the EU is really enhanced cooperation? What do you see in the road ahead over the next 5 years?
Yeah, crystal ball gazing is hard at the moment, but I think, certainly here, I think, in the immediate aftermath of the referendum that, the EU was going to crumble. We're going to have this domino effect of a series of member states leaving. I really don't see that being the case. I think that now that the bulk, and I say that in kind of a caveat and inverted commas, that, we do have that EU-UK trade and cooperation agreement. Yes, we're going to have outstanding issues on the Northern Ireland Protocol and further debate on that. There's no doubt about that. But I think that the EU can now draw a line on the kind of the UK leaving the European Union and focus on some of these key issues, like you say, with regards to increased democracy in EU member states and the rise of what we have seen over the last decade or so of Euroscepticism trickling into that illiberalism effect as well. I think that the big challenge for the European Union over the next 5 years is going to be how it really reforms. I think we're going to need EU reform. I think we're starting to kind of get that through, and whether we do see further policy competencies being, as I say, kind of transferred up to the supranational level of the European Union. So I think it'll be interesting to see what comes out of the Convention on the Future of Europe, and really what the plan of action will be for the European Union over the next 5 years.
And thanks very much, Kathryn Simpson, or Dr. Kathryn Simpson, sorry. And thanks for everyone for joining us. Ireland and the EU poll 2021. And I'll leave you with Noelle O'Connell. Noelle, your final thoughts.
Great. Thank you very much, Shona. Thank you very much, Kathryn, Dr. Simpson. Fantastic engaging exchange of views. And I would just like to thank both of you for taking the time to be with us here this morning and giving your insights and great questions. Shona certainly got me thinking on a lot of topics. Our Ireland and the EU poll is something that we in European Movement Ireland are very proud of. It's something that we've been doing since 2013, and it is a really useful barometer in terms of tracking and analysing the trends of Irish EU sentiment. And if there's one takeaway I think I would leave people with, is that fantastic to see that level of support at 84%. But as Kathryn correctly pointed out, it's nuanced. We need to continually and constructively engage and debate and ensure that we work to not only reduce the democratic deficit, but also the knowledge deficit, and continue to have that debate, that conversation, that dialogue, which is what we're going to be doing as part of the Conference on the Future of Europe. I'd encourage you to get involved. All of the poll findings are available across all EU Ireland's social media platforms and on europeanmovement.ie on our website. And thanks a million for everyone's time. Thank you, Shona. Thanks, Kathryn.